It's great to see such an enthusiastic turnout given the time of the year, like hot and also summer. And so, however, for those who have not met me, I'm Jack Leong, and I have the honor of serving as the director of the Digitally Canada Hong Kong Library. So thank you very much for coming out to the seminar on the 2012 elections and the universal suffrage movement. Just like the weather recently in Toronto, these topics are really hot. We're just a few months away from 2012, and also the government's proposal on by-election proposal, and also the coming up of the chief executive election, so whether direct or indirect. We will soon have a direct interaction with the key players here today. So there have been a lot of interesting discussion going on among the media in Hong Kong and also some of the Chinese media in Toronto. And I'm sure this seminar will add another very interesting angle, as I said, from some of the key players coming all the way from Hong Kong. The seminar will be chaired by Professor Eric Kwok, a very famous scholar from the Department of Sociology. So before I hand over the time to him, I would like to acknowledge and introduce another very important person for making the opening remarks. So Julie Hannaford. Julie is currently the acting chief librarian for the university, and her more permanent job is as the associate librarian for the humanities and social science, and also the director for OIC Library. So OIC stands for Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. As the associate librarian, Julie oversees a number of libraries and departments, so including this Digitally Canada Hong Kong Library. She has made tremendous support for the success of the Hong Kong Seminar Series and also the development of the library in general. So please join me in welcoming Julie.
Thanks, Jack. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's event, the Legislative Council election in 2012 and the future of the universal suffrage movement. I'd like to thank our speakers, the Honourable Leong and Mr. Kwok, for participating in what promises to be a very interesting afternoon. It's terrific that you could join us all the way from Hong Kong, and I understand this is your first public event here, so thank you and welcome. To give you a bit of background about where you are, University of Toronto Libraries, or UTL, as we call our system, is a world-renowned institution. It's the largest academic library in Canada and the fourth largest in North America, behind just Harvard, Yale, and Columbia. We've got a vast array of resources, which are imperative as we have lots of students to support. We're inching up towards 80,000 at this point, with just under 8,000 international students as well. One of our growing strengths is our collection of materials that support Canada and Hong Kong studies, including in particular at this library, the Richard Charles Lee Canada Hong Kong Library. Since its permanent home was established here in Robarts Library in 2008, it's steadily grown in both size and reputation. The Canada Hong Kong Library truly does act as a platform and gateway for interactions and communications among scholars interested in issues that relate to Hong Kong and Canada. The library holds a Hong Kong seminar series, runs a visiting scholars program, and Jack does a wonderful job of having lots of outreach programs and activities such as the event today. Really an event where scholars, students, and members of the public can come out together to dialogue and collaborate. Now turning to our event at hand, I know that you're in for an informative and thought-provoking afternoon. There have been two groups that partnered with Jack and his staff to organize today's event, the York Centre for Asian Research and Canada Hong Kong Link. I'd like to thank them very much for their participation. So I'll turn things over now to Professor Eric Fong to formally introduce our speakers, but welcome everyone.
So I guess I'm going to talk from here rather than from the podium, because I think that have a closer encounter, so-called, with you all. And thank you so much for coming to this seminar in this hot middle summer. And I'm sure that you all are very interested about the topic. And we are very delighted to have two important persons from Hong Kong to share with us some of their experiences about the situation, and especially the political situation in Hong Kong. They are Mr. Dennis Kwok and Mr. Honorable Alan Leong. Before I hand over the time to them, let me just quickly introduce them to you. I guess most of you already quite familiar with them, but just let me have a quick introduction. Mr. Dennis Kwok graduated from King's College London, United Kingdom in 1999. Dennis holds a law degree and was admitted as a solicitor in the High Court of Hong Kong in 2002, and to the role of Solicitors of England and Wales in 2003. Subsequently, he was called to the Hong Kong Bar in 2006. He is the founder member of both the Civic Party and the Professional Commons, a think tank on public policies in Hong Kong. He was also elected as an election committee member for the legal functional constituency. He is a core member of the Citizens Commission on Constitutional Development headed by the former Chief Secretary, Ms. Anson Chan. He has been serving on the Executive Committee of the Civic Party since 2008 as Chairman of the Economic and Public Finance Policy Branch. And the second speaker we have this afternoon is Honorable Alan Leong. Alan has been a legislative councillor representing the Kowloon East since 2004. And I guess most of you will be quite familiar what happened in a few years ago, because he was ran against Mr. Donald Tsang, the incumbent chief executive, in the first ever contested chief executive election held since the reversion of sovereignty of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to the People's Republic of China in 1997. And also another quite familiar event in last year, actually in 2010, Alan's together with other 4 legislators resigned in order to trigger the by-election in each of the 5 geographical constituencies in Hong Kong. And prior to his political career, Alan has a successful career as a barrister in private practice. He was the first senior counsel appointed after the establishment of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. And he also served as the chairman of the Hong Kong Bar Association from 2001 to 2003. And he was also among the first group in the Hong Kong Bar Association to break the ice in establishing official contact with mainland legal counterpart. As the chairman of the Committee of Mainland Relations and Practice at that time, he negotiated for the participation of Hong Kong barristers in Hong Kong's legal services after China acceded to the World Trade Organization. Alan is a founding member of the Civic Party, established on the March 19, 2006, and was elected the party leader in January 2011. So without further delay, I would like to hand over the time to our 2 speakers.
Thank you, Professor Fong, for that very kind introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure that we can come here and share with you on the topic of today. I know we are visiting at a not very convenient time of the year when most on campus would have left already for their vacation, but because of what is going to happen in Hong Kong, namely on November 6th we would have a very big territory-wide district council election, and as party leader I must go back and lead the party into that election, so I can't spare time to come in September. So that's why we are here at this not very convenient moment. But given that inconvenience, we can still see so many present this afternoon. That certainly is our honor, and we are very happy to see you all here. Perhaps I would let you know that between Dennis and I, we think that at most we would talk for no more than half an hour so as to leave more time for interaction and dialogue. I personally do not like monologue. So you will bear with us for about the first 30 minutes, and after that the floor will be open. I think the convenient starting point here must be the march by about 200,000 people, as reported by the organizers, on the 1st of July 2011, which was just about 3 weeks ago. This is the largest turnout recorded after the historic march on the 1st of July 2003. Now, what provoked so many Hong Kong people to have taken to the streets on this occasion was that the Hong Kong SAR government wanted to strip us of our right to vote in a by-election in the event any vacancy arises in the legislature of Hong Kong. Now, why is the government trying to bulldoze this bill through from start to their originally intended finish within about 6 weeks? This is really unheard of, unprecedented in Hong Kong, but they wanted to do it without even bogus consultation. Right? Now, this is quite ridiculous, and it was because of the very high-handed manner in which the government was trying to do that actually provoked 200,000 people onto the street about 3 weeks ago. As a result of that public demonstration of discontent and disappointment, Donald Tsang, the incumbent chief executive, announced that the government would actually postpone the second and third reading of that bill until after a 2-month consultation had been completed. And only about, 18 hours ago in Hong Kong, the government announced the revised proposals for stripping Hong Kong people of this right to vote in a by-election. So they are not going to give up this idea of doing away with by-elections. Now, why is that? As I had been introduced, last year, 2010, saw what we called in Hong Kong a de facto referendum. Hong Kong, unlike Canada, does not have referendum laws. So when there is highly controversial issues that the legislature cannot deal with or handle by itself, there is no means by which we can have resort to the general public of Hong Kong for a objective and scientific gauging of public opinion, or if you like, a form of direct democracy. And this problem of the functional constituencies pulling the leg of Hong Kong and standing in the way of a fair government, a fair distribution of political power, and also the resources and the fruits of economic activities. This problem with the functional constituencies has haunted Hong Kong since the 1980s. And the Legislative Council after Council was unable to resolve it. And last year, the government moved a set of proposals in the Legislative Council making provisions for the electoral models for elections of the Chief Executive and also for election of the Legislative Council for next year, 2012. And in order that this problem with functional constituencies can be resolved once and for all, 5 directly elected geographical constituency legislators, including myself, resigned so as to trigger a by-election in law. But we referred one issue to the people of Hong Kong, namely to abolish the functional constituencies. So we promoted the by-election as a form of what we call de facto referendum. So we ask Hong Kong people to go into the ballot box and cast your vote to say yay or nay for the abolition. Notwithstanding active dissuasion by the Hong Kong SAR government for people coming out to vote, there were still more than 500,000 of people turning up on the 16th of May 2010 and cast their vote. Now, what happened, I can bet you anything, sent a shiver down the spine of the leadership in Beijing. And of course, Hong Kong SAR government would also not want to have to be forced to face up to public opinion scientifically and objectively gauged in the form of any de facto referendum to happen in the future. Now, in the next legislative term, the 5th Legislative Council of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, we anticipate there would be at least the following highly politically charged and controversial issues that would come to the Council. Now, firstly, there would be the possibility that Article 23, that is the National Security Bill, would come again to this Council. The National Security Bill was a bill that the Hong Kong SAR was obliged to pass into law by Article 23 of the Basic Law. It asks the Special Administrative Region to pass laws to make criminal acts like treason, sedition, secession, etc. Now, there was an attempt to do that in the year 2002, at the time when I was the chairman of the Hong Kong Bar. And it was also because of this Article 23 saga that I moved step by step into the political arena. In fact, I never before thought that I would want to become a politician at all, in the wildest of my dreams. But anyway, that is history. If you would want to hear more about it, you can ask me questions about it. But this is one piece of legislation that possibly would come our way in the next Legislative Council. Another one that we must deal with would be the making of electoral laws to provide for the election of the Legislative Council in 2016, and also for the formation of this nomination committee as provided for by Article 45 of the Basic Law for election of our Chief Executive for 2017. Now, these would be very highly politically charged. These will be controversial issues which the Hong Kong SAR government may want to try its hand on bulldozing them through without proper consultation. Now, and that really fills you in as to the possible reason why the government would want to do it in such a high-handed manner in passing this law about the replacement mechanism, trying to do away with by-election in Hong Kong. Because they do not want any legislator to resign when any one of those controversial issues is coming to the Legislative Council, and for another resignation to take place, by which we want to resort to the means of direct democracy, returning to the people their right to be consulted. All right, so that is really an update, the latest from Hong Kong. Air fresh from Hong Kong. Now, I promised to keep my introduction short, so I'm winding that up. If you care to think back on political development in Hong Kong, we started our fight for democracy in the 1980s. And in the Basic Law, we are promised universal suffrage for both the election of the Chief Executive and the election of the legislature. They are respectively Articles 45 and 68 of the Basic Law. So this is nothing new. This is a promise enshrined in the Sino-British Joint Declaration and given effect to in the Basic Law. This is nothing new. It is a promise to the Hong Kong people. But what we have witnessed was that we went from 12 directly elected members out of a 60-member council in the first Legislative Council to a 20-member directly elected in the second council to a 30-member third Legislative Council in the first 3 election cycles in Hong Kong. But the National People's Congress Standing Committee, by an interpretation of the Basic Law in 2005, actually put a stop to this progression. So in the 4th Legislative Council in which I'm now serving, which we had expected that for the first time, directly elected geographical constituency members would outnumber the functional constituency members, given the trend I just described to you in the first 3 councils, did not happen because NPC-SC put a stop to it. When that was done in 2005, people in Hong Kong thought, oh, well, if we are not going to have it in the election cycle of 2007-2008, we would have it in the next election cycle of 2012. But to our disappointment, history repeats itself. In 2007, when NPC Standing Committee again handed down a decision to say that 2012, you would not have direct elections. You would not have universal suffrage, but you could, I emphasize, you could, but not you must, have the universal suffrage for the chief executive in 2017, and possibly in 2020, you would have universal suffrage for the Legislative Council. So this is a very unsatisfactory state of affairs. We do not see Beijing honoring what was enshrined in the Sino-British Joint Declaration. But it is even more frustrating to see that it is because of the deep-seated conflict in Hong Kong and as a result of the unfair distribution of political powers that many of public policies in Hong Kong have been very unbalanced. Now, I stop here and I'll leave the up-and-coming young man of the Civic Party Executive Committee to carry on this monologue.
We're used to hearing Alan's monologue, so today we have a chance to have a dialogue. But joking aside, this is a privilege to be here. Thank you very much for inviting Alan and myself, and it's a real pleasure to coming all the way out here to Toronto and meeting so many new friends. A bit about myself. I was born in Canada. I was born in Edmonton. My father was working there as an engineer at the time. But my family emigrated back to Hong Kong when I was 3, so I grew up in Hong Kong. But Canada has always been considered as my second home. So technically speaking, I am a second-generation return immigrant to be studied by Eric and his project. So you can study me. But I think, and my email. I think for people in my generation of Hong Kong citizens and the next generation, the biggest political question that we will all face in our lifetime is whether the concept of one country, two system, self-autonomy and self-governance could continue up to 2046 and beyond. That is the biggest political question facing our generation, whether the freedoms, the values, the institutions, the rule of law that we have in Hong Kong could continue going forward and beyond 2046. The reason why I think this is the biggest political question facing our generation is because after witnessing 14 years of Hong Kong SAR government since the handover, I think the biggest consensus amongst the people of Hong Kong is that the present system does not work. It does not reflect the realities of 21st century Hong Kong. The system is outdated. It does not reflect the aspiration of the Hong Kong people. So, well, Alan has touched on this a bit in his introduction, but what you can see in Hong Kong right now is there is a high level of dissatisfaction, and that dissatisfaction is strange in a way because Hong Kong is so prosperous in many ways that the government is filled with surplus. When governments around the world are dealing with debt crisis, we have enough money to hand out to $6,000 for each person in order to appease them. But why is the public dissatisfaction so high when, on the surface at least, we have a government that has the ability to do so much? So there is a real sense of governing crisis in Hong Kong. And the questions which people are asking in some circles is really, is Hong Kong still governable? My short answer to that question is no. Under the present system, Hong Kong is not governable because the system has failed to catch up with the developments of the society as a whole. So, as I said, I think if the present governing crisis is to continue, that the Hong Kong people fail to demonstrate that they could effectively govern themselves under the framework of one country, two system, then the serious question that would emerge is when it comes to negotiating with Beijing regarding the continuation of this framework and the continuation of the basic law beyond 2046, we will be in a very weak position because we have not shown that we could properly govern this place that we call home. So that's why I begin by putting this question about whether this political question facing my generation and the next is the one country, two system concept and whether it could carry forward. Now, if you agree with me that the present system doesn't work, then the next question is reform. Now, how do we reform the present system in order to make it better or make it work better for the Hong Kong people? Now, as I see it, there are two broad ways of reform. On the one hand, you can say there should be more democratization in the system. There should be more direct democracy in the system. Right now, we don't have universal suffrage. Should we go that way? Should we go give more power to the people and so that they could participate bottom up? Or the other reform, the other way of reform, which some people believe should be the way, is what I call the more concentration of powers in a smaller group of people, so that things could be done more effectively, so that there will be more, if I may put it that way, a more sort of Singaporean model, which some in Beijing believes that Hong Kong should become a more concentrated system of government, where there's a one-party rule, effectively dominating the whole of legislature, where the judiciary will work with the government, and whenever you criticize the government, you will be sued for defamation, and the court will always rule in favor of the government. Should we have that kind of system where everything is streamlined, power is concentrated, or should we reform the system to liberalize, if I may use that word, liberalize the power, the concentrated power, and to facilitate and to empower the people from bottom up so that they could participate in a fairer and more equal democratic system of government. Now, of course, Alan and I are a big proponent of the further democratization of Hong Kong because we believe that by reforming the system in this manner, this is the way in which Hong Kong could show that it could govern itself effectively in the 21st century, and that this is the kind of system that Hong Kong needs, and that the more concentration of powers in the hands of a few does not suit the reality of Hong Kong, certainly not for people in my generation and the next. So
the interesting thing is and I would like to open this question to the floor, is that the question Hong Kong faces are interestingly what the world faces in the 21st century, because so much is talked about the China model these days, that China model with their authoritarianism, with the way that, at least on the surface, that the things are getting done, the country's becoming more prosperous, things are getting done effectively and efficiently. Whereas a lot of Western democracies we see are facing a debt crisis after another, that they seem to be falling apart. Now, the debate is, in a way, very similar to the debate that Hong Kong faces at this juncture, is which road do we go down? What choice do we make? What options we decide is better for the future of good governance? So I think Hong Kong has always been a barometer of national progress. This is a 100-year centenary of anniversary of the 1911 revolution. And Dr. Sun conceived his revolutionary ideas in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has acted as a laboratory in economic, social affairs and political affairs for the rest of the nation, pushing the nation towards modernization. Now, I believe Hong Kong can still play that role. Hong Kong will never become the political capital of China, but its role will always be pivotal in changing the whole atmosphere of China, in helping to show the way forward. Now, I believe that Hong Kong can play that role in showing the way of how, in a Chinese society, how democracy could work with the rule of law. Hong Kong can be a pioneer in that sense. So thank you for your patience, and we'll open up the dialogue with your questions.
In Mandarin or in Cantonese, you feel free to do so, and then we are going to translate your questions into English. And also, we are going to summarize within English, Cantonese, and Mandarin. All right, so now's the time.
Back then, were the people more happy that back then? I don't know, I came here quiet and polite and to scale of the one. In the private sector is saying that dictatorship maybe is good if the dictator is really bright, really follow.
Entirely legitimate, and it's the question we need to ask ourselves. Especially for proponents of democracy and democratic values, we need to answer these questions. Now, it is actually a very traditional Chinese sort of mindset. It goes back way into our culture, is that if there's a strongman leadership doing the right thing, then the country will become a better place and people will be happy. Why bother with all the other democratic issues? Now, if you look back in history, take the Qing dynasty, for example. The first three emperors, or one of the first three emperors of the Qing dynasty, Hangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong, those three emperors are considered three of the best emperors ever in Chinese history. And within the span of 120 years, they turned China into one of the most powerful nations in the world, within the span of 120 years, the three of them. Now, within 50 years, after the death of Qianlong, within 50 years, the whole of China is already in crisis. It is embedded in civil war. It is subject to foreign invasion. The country is a mess. The economy is a mess, was a mess, and people were far more than just not happy. The country was in crisis. Now, my point being is what we're trying to do for the new China, or for modern China in the 21st century, is to build a system that is sustainable, that would last. Now, I take your point that whoever is elected, say, in Hong Kong, or if there are to be elections in China, might not be the best leader, might not be the best the person to lead the country. But with a system that is sustainable, that could sustain crisis or could go through challenges with regime change without bloodshed, will give the country a better foundation for sustainable development. Because every time, if you look back in history, every time there is a change of power in China, there will always be a huge revolution or bloodshed. We don't want to see that. This is not a civilized country, not something we want to do. So the question is, do you want a sustainable system? And if you do, what is the way of doing it? We believe that democracy with perhaps evolved values should provide the answer. We haven't got there yet, but I think that's the better direction than going back what we used to have, strongman leadership, because that guy would not live forever, and what happens after him, we don't know. Yeah.
And we all have heard from Winston Churchill that democracy was a very bad thing. But until we have found something that is better and can work, we have to just put up with it for the time being. I think that is that's the situation what we are in now. Of course, if you talk about efficiency, if you have a benign dictator, that would be best. But how can you make sure that there is this benign dictator? How to pick him or her? And how can you make sure that power does not corrupt this benign dictator? These are all questions pointing to the answer that we can only believe a system but not believe a man, or for that purpose, a woman. Of course, democracy to me is very simple. It is a system by which the rights and freedoms of individuals are being respected. Of course, everyone, everywhere, when you practice democracy, everywhere has its own problem. I'm sure the Canadian form of democracy, democratic government, has its problems. Likewise, America, the country we just visited, also had its problems. In fact, those problems are not easy to solve. But in Hong Kong, we have argued the case that Hong Kong can be the laboratory of the future democratic system of China. We can consider that we start from a clean slate. We may draw from experiences overseas, from Canada, from America, from UK, from wherever, you name it. But we hope we can devise and design a system that is best suited to solving the problems of Hong Kong, while, of course, at the very core of this new system, we would respect the rights and the freedoms of individuals. This is where we are heading. Yeah, I suppose that is a long enough answer.
Yeah, we have a number of
the Hong Kong Macau office under the State Department of the People's Republic of China. Now, I think I agree with Mr. Mann that it was almost unheard of for any Western democracy to actually prescribe that any candidate standing for election for the highest office in the country to love the country. Right? I think it goes without saying. But of course, the understatement of Mr. Wang would be that they are using this as a screening out process. Whether you love Hong Kong and whether you love the country would be judged only by leaders in Zhongnanhai, not to be judged by the people of Hong Kong. So that would be, yes, a screening process, and now as to whether or not that would work with Hong Kong people, I know not. But I suppose Hong Kong people are very pragmatic, very practical. They would not want to elect anybody to the office of chief executive if Beijing definitely said we could not swallow him, we could not stand him. we could not possibly work with him. So I suppose what Mr. Wang did was nothing novel. He was just repeating what had been said for at least the past decade or so, whenever the Chief Executive's office is up for grab. The interesting thing about the election to Chief Executive Office in Hong Kong is this. Now, so far we have heard three names who were supposed to be or who wanted to be in the running. Now, but these people, except Mr. C.Y. Leong, who had the audacity to engage people in Hong Kong by having written more than 500,000 words in Ming Pao, I think. Not every bit of it I can understand, but at least he tried his very best to engage the people. The other two, namely Rita Fan and Henry Tang, they so far have been very shy from sharing with us each of their vision for Hong Kong and very practical matters like how can we make our young people see hope in the future of Hong Kong, how they would deal with the very poor rapport, very poor relationship between the executive and the legislative branch of government, what is the role of the executive council, etc. Now, this is, in fact, quite weird, because they apparently are waiting to be anointed by Beijing rather than wanting to engage Hong Kong people and want to have our support. But that is the present situation in Hong Kong. I wonder if Dennis would want to fill in.
I agree. I think
on Mr. Mann's question.
Thanks for your question, Mr. Mann. I think that's the question executive that heads our government. Why are the candidates, if they are interested in the job, not coming out and appeal directly to the Hong Kong people? These are my policies once I'm in office. It sounds elementary to Canadians, but if I want to run for this public office, I come out. This is my policy agenda. I believe once in power, I would be able to do A, B, C, D, and you can judge me by that. But the problems facing Hong Kong are so many and so urgent in many ways that we cannot afford this dilly-dally dancing around the hopes and dreams of Beijing, of who they pick, one day. We need to get rid of this nonsense and let the candidates come out and let there be a competition of ideas, competition of public policies, and the Hong Kong people are intelligent enough to choose. And I hope the choice would be something that Beijing could accept, but this is a reality which Beijing should need to wake up to, I think.
Thank you, Dennis and Alan. People in China are risking their lives, deciding to run.
Do you want to? Huh? Well, you see, this is also a question that I have been asking myself repeatedly. My humble answer is really this. The best that we can do for promoting the democratic cause in China is to sustain our own institutions, like what I mentioned, the rule of law, the separation of powers. We have the Independent Commission Against Corruption. We have the Director of Audit. We have the Ombudsman, to keep the executive power under check. We would also want to make sure that our values like justice, equality, fairness would continue to flourish in Hong Kong. Now, if we can do that, Hong Kong will stay as unique a place now and in the future as it was in the past, as it was 100 years ago when these values and systems once inspired Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And nobody knows when would be the last straw off the camel's back in the mainland. We can only try to achieve and fight for democracy for Hong Kong. And of course, I have argued this case consistently throughout this speaking tour to the States and Canada, that the mainland Chinese government cannot dodge the issue and refuse to face the music forever. We have a rapidly expanding middle class in the mainland. The middle class is now sized, according to one source, 120 million. When you have such a large and expanding middle class, the middle class has its expectations. And if the economy of China cannot be as rosy as it was in the past decade, in the next decade or in the decade after next, then the economy is bound to fail the expectations of the middle class. Their demand for political participation, for the rule of law to prevail over China, would then be really too strong to resist. So in order not to be caught in the situation of an outburst that the CCP would not know how to handle, I would advise them that they should really start this experiment with Hong Kong as the laboratory for a democratic form of government, a government fully accountable to the people, to be manned by Chinese people, Chinese people from Hong Kong, who inherit from the 5,000 odd years of cultural heritage of China, while at the same time also having been exposed to Western ideas, and such a experiment may produce the product that not only would help Hong Kong to solve the ungovernable deadlock that we are in, but it could also be a catalyst for change in China, and it could also be a reference that the mainland can draw on. If I may just finally add that the Civic Party is not advocating at all, as Dennis and I have been telling our American friends, that the American model, or for that purpose, the Canadian model, must be the model to be practiced in Hong Kong or China. As I already said, the democratic model, as practiced in many countries, know of problems. But democracy has really this good thing, beauty, this beauty about it. It is an ever-evolving system. It can minimize impact when the economy is not doing well. And it also has this ability to self-perfect. Now, these are important attributes of the democratic system, which we hope Hong Kong will soon have.